This video is sponsored by Call of War, the free online PvP strategy game where you'll choose a real country to lead during World War II. It's the darkest hours of human history, and it's up to you to build a powerful army to defend your country. You'll fight up to 100 other players on historic maps in real-time games that can take weeks to complete. What I really love about Call of War is the variety of technological paths you can go down. Do you want to tank rush your enemies, or keep them suppressed with your air superiority? You can even focus on the development of secret weapons like nuclear bombers and V2 rockets. It's your choice. Everything is possible in Call of War. There's even different what-if scenarios that depict different outcomes of World War II. Infographics show viewers get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. So click the special link in the description, choose a country, and start fighting in the ultimate confrontation right now. Poland and Germany fighting side by side against the Soviet Union. The United States in a space race with Japan. If World War II had never happened, history may have looked a lot weirder. There are simply too many reasons World War II may not have happened, so instead we'll focus on the most realistic changes that could have prevented the conflict we remember as the Second World War. The first of these changes is a shift in global attitudes toward fascism and communism. After World War I, the Soviet Union had adopted a policy of revolution abroad, believing that its only hope of survival against the capitalist imperial powers of the day was to undermine them by encouraging communist revolutions within their own borders. Lenin, the father of the Soviet Union, saw a world whose human and natural resources had been partitioned by the greatest imperialist powers, and was appalled to see workers being recruited or volunteering to fight in World War I, a conflict from which they gained nothing, while their imperial masters gained ever more power, prestige, and riches. Even before the Soviet Revolution that toppled the Russian Tsar, communist grumblings were spreading around the world. Away from the front on leave during World War I, Hitler famously observed, at least in his own mind, that the glorious German Empire was being undermined by, amongst others, communist traitors. This wasn't entirely untrue, as after the formation of the USSR, the strategy of revolution abroad was seen as vital for survival of the Soviet state, and the nation sent resources and intelligence agents to support communist movements around the world. In our fantasy scenario where World War II never happens, Hitler's fears of communist sabotage are more true than they ever were in real history. Revolutionary movements gained traction across the West, reaching even to the US. While in America the communist push is a part of a robust national dialogue on politics, the communist zeal spreading across workers in France, Britain, Germany, and others threaten the very foundations of a long-standing imperial state. It simply can't be tolerated. France and Britain find themselves having more in common with Hitler and his fascist Nazis than with Stalin and his communists, a fact that was true even in our timeline. As fears of revolution grow, Germany prepares to rebuild armies for war, but its forces are heading east, not west. Germany makes an offer to Poland in exchange for the Polish Corridor and the reunification of East Prussia. Germany will assist in rebuilding a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to the east. The Polish Corridor had originally been the cause of World War II and was an item of great contention after World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles split East Prussia off from the German homeland by granting the Polish control of a strip of land between the two. Poland had already fought a war with Lithuania in the year after World War I, but had been forced to a settlement by the international community and the pressure of an even larger Polish-Soviet war. The absorption of most of Lithuania into Poland would give the nation badly needed access to the sea, and in the eyes of the Polish people, Hitler's offer is a good deal. Hitler, however, is getting the far better end of the deal, because the reformation of a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth would create a massive buffer between Germany and the USSR, and Hitler's already planning on invading the Soviet Union. Hitler's ambition to take on the USSR is twofold. First, he needs to end what he sees as a critical political threat to his leadership, the subversion of the German people by communist infiltrators. His second ambition, however, is to take the resource-rich lands of the southern USSR to fuel Germany's growing military and industrial base. If Germany is going to compete with Britain and France, it needs to conquer new lands. The loss of its colonial holdings in Africa after World War I was a devastating blow to the German economy. With Germany's eyes turned eastward, Britain and France are satisfied Hitler is not an immediate enemy. In fact, he may be a potential ally. Soon, German troops have reunified East Prussia and march into Poland, but this time by invitation. Together, German and Polish troops seize most of Lithuania by force, officially re-establishing the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth after nearly 150 years. The Soviets, however, know that German aid to Poland is a cover for the German army to establish itself for an invasion of the Soviet Union. The nation has gone into a war economy and is rapidly arming itself. But as war inevitably breaks out between Germany and the Soviet Union, two key factors severely hamper the Soviets' ability to fight back a German onslaught. The first is direct support of British and French naval and air forces to the German offensive. While neither side is willing to directly contribute ground troops, they're happy to provide Germany with naval and air support. The German Luftwaffe is supplemented by hundreds of French and British aircraft, and the Soviet Air Force is decimated in days. The Soviet Union's second problem in this new timeline is the complete lack of American aid. In the real timeline, the United States supplied the Soviets with nearly everything it needed to fight the Germans, totaling a staggering $180 billion in today's money. U.S. aid included 400,000 jeeps and trucks, to the point that nearly every non-armored vehicle in operation with the Red Army was American-made. 14,000 aircraft, 8,000 tractors, 13,000 tanks, 1.5 million blankets, 15 million pairs of army boots, 107,000 tons of cotton, 2.7 million tons of gasoline and other oil products, and 4.5 million tons of food. Without U.S. aid, the Soviet army might have had the manpower to fight against the Germans, but it could not clothe them, feed them, arm them, or even transport them to the front lines. In our new timeline, the U.S. would have had no reason to assist the Soviets, as during World War II, the goal of American assistance was to defeat the Germans, who were threatening Britain and already had seized France for themselves. In fact, Soviet communism was seen as a greater threat to the American way of life than European imperialism or even fascism. Hitler might have been evil, but at least he was being evil in his own lands for all the Americans could care. Within months, the Red Army completely collapses under German onslaught, and Stalin flees far to the eastern territories of the Soviet Union. Hitler is satisfied with the conquest of Moscow and sees no reason to expend more resources and soldiers to strike further east. With his seizures of grain, oil, and mineral-rich southern USSR, Hitler has the economic might to offset the loss of Germany's overseas colonies. A détente of sorts settles over Europe. Hitler's famous final solution goes into effect in seized territories, but the scope of the massacre is severely limited by international pressure. Unlike in our real timeline, this new timeline, Hitler needs to build the strength of the Third Reich and can't afford to ignore the opinions of nations he simply militarily overshadowed or occupied in the real timeline. Rather than massive concentration camps, undesirable minorities are instead forced to live in cordoned-off ghettos and work camps. The international press decrees the treatment of the Jews, Slavs, and other minorities by the Nazis, but no nation wants to take on a rejuvenated German army to correct the issue. An arms race begins in Europe as the alliance of convenience quickly falls apart. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Soviet Union's fortunes suffer even further. In our real timeline, Japan and the Soviet Union fought a series of skirmishes as Japanese troops pushed even further into China. Now, with most of the Asian Red Army forces diverted to fight the Nazis, where they suffer a crushing defeat, the Japanese complete a humiliation of the Russian military that began with the Russo-Japanese War of 1904. Japan's Western Front is secure, allowing the nation to concentrate on its continued conquest of China and the nation's biggest roadblock to its imperial ambitions in the Pacific, the United States of America. With the Japanese expansionism threatening American and European interests in the Pacific, the United States has already attempted to punish the Japanese with an embargo on oil and other resources needed by the Japanese military. The oil embargo was particularly crippling, as Japan had gotten much of its oil from the US, and if the oil tap wasn't turned back on, Japan could not hope to continue its conquest of Southeast Asia and beyond. In the United States, the Great Depression has become a recession, and while the economy is slowly on the upturn, it isn't anywhere near where it was before the big crash of the 20s. In our real timeline, the build-up to World War II was an economic shot in the arm for the United States. But even today, economists aren't completely sure just how much the impact had on the US's economic recovery, and most doubt that it was wholly responsible for ending the Great Depression. In our new timeline, the economic boon of supplying the Europeans with weapons they needed to fight the Nazis never happened, and the US economic recovery takes even longer than normal. However, that's about to change. The Japanese need to knock the United States out of the Pacific for good if they're going to seize oil-rich Indonesia and beyond. American bases in the Philippines give them a strategic staging point to counter Japanese ambitions, and these must be eliminated. European colonial powers still hold many territories in the region, which Japan also plans on conquering, but their militaries are simply staged too far away to pose much of a threat. Without US support in the region, even the mighty British Royal Navy will find itself hard-pressed to resist the full might of the Imperial Japanese Navy, especially when the British are caught up in an escalating arms race versus a greatly empowered Nazi Germany. Japan launches a devastating surprise attack against Pearl Harbor, causing massive damage to the American Pacific Fleet. The rest of the IJN begins an immediate conquest of European colonial holdings in the region, clearing the path for the seizure of the vast oil deposits that Japan needs to fuel itself. European powers turn to Germany and propose a joint effort against a Japanese aggression in the Pacific. However, Hitler knows that the loss of the colonies in Asia will have a dramatic impact on his rivals, while Germany has already gained much in Russia and stands to gain much less from a war with Japan. He refuses, and rather than weaken their defenses against a possible Nazi aggression, one by one the European powers relinquish their colonies to Japan. The fall of the American Philippines to invading Japanese forces seals the deal. It's simply not worth fighting in the Pacific and potentially losing the home front to a surprise German attack. The declaration of war by Japan immediately sets the United States in a wartime footing, revitalizing the American economy with no need to fight German U-boats in the Atlantic or support European operations. Much of the American Atlantic Fleet is immediately transferred to the Pacific. Within a year, the United States has already begun an offensive against Imperial Japanese forces, with a military strengthened by millions of troops, thousands of planes and tanks, and hundreds of large and small ships not needed to fight in Europe. The Imperial Japanese Navy suffers a slow but inevitable defeat, followed by a total blockade of Japan. The nation is slowly starved into submission. The U.S. commanders refuse to expend 500,000 American lives it'll take to invade the island physically. Without the pooling of U.S. and European resources, the American atomic bomb doesn't happen, at least not for some time. Instead, the British are the first to the bomb, though it comes many years later than in our timeline. Nazi Germany and the United States are quick to follow. Germany has slowed down in its progress because of Hitler's paranoia and his insistence that different teams work on the same project at the same time without contact with each other. This way he believes he can safeguard the German atomic project from sabotage by spies, but all it really does is hamstring the research efforts. The world is not in ruins as it is at the end of World War II in our timeline. European colonies across Africa also remain, as the U.S. insistence that Europe and colonialism was never made part of its demands for entry into war against Germany. Colonialism enters a new, darker age as global powers seek to quickly build their militaries for a conflict all know is coming. And even the U.S. installs puppet governments in territory seized from Japan across the Pacific, needing to strengthen itself in the face of a nuclear-armed Britain and Germany both. The Soviet Union has become a backwater state. While Germany and the U.S. have both become superpowers, Germany's full ambitions, however, can't be achieved as long as the Royal Navy continues to control the seas off the German coast. And Hitler's dream of a Third Reich that lasts 1,000 years are now threatened by the growing military collaboration between France and Britain. As Hitler prepares his war plans against the two allied nations, he sends representatives to speak with the American President Harry S. Truman. Truman grants Hitler assurances that Americans are sick of war after their tough-won battles in the Pacific and have no plans to interfere if Germany attacks France. Besides, with Britain and France both having nuclear weapons now, it's in America's best interests if the number of nuclear powers in the world is reduced dramatically and quickly, and if those existing weapons are turned against Germany rather than the U.S. But if Germany proves successful, it'll be the strongest nuclear power in the world in full control of Europe. As the German attack against France through Belgium is launched under the cover of a rain of nuclear bombs, Truman is true to his word and the U.S. maintains its isolationist policies. However, he also orders the largest military buildup of U.S. forces in history and the expansion of America's ever-growing nuclear arsenal. Thanks again to our sponsor, Call of War, the online PvP strategy game played by millions of users worldwide. Use the link in the description to get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Click the link, choose a country, and start fighting in the ultimate confrontation right now. Now go check out What If World War I Never Happened, or click this other video instead.